Imagine working full-time at the most powerful building on Earth and getting paid absolutely nothing for it. No salary, no stipend, not even a bus pass, just the privilege of saying you worked there. That is exactly what thousands of young Americans are now being asked to do at Donald Trump's White House. And while this might sound like a minor administrative detail buried in the fine print of government policy, it is anything but. Because when you pull back the curtain on this single decision, what you find underneath reveals something much larger. A philosophy, a pattern, and a message about who this administration believes America's young people really are. Let's break this down completely. For most of American history, the White House internship program ran on one currency: prestige. You did not get paid. You got a line on your resume. You got proximity to power. You got stories to tell your grandchildren. The assumption baked into the entire system was that only certain kinds of young people could afford to work for free in Washington, D.C., one of the most expensive cities in the United States, for 10 to 12 weeks at a stretch. And that assumption quietly ensured that the halls of the White House were walked by interns who came from comfortable backgrounds, wealthy families, and elite institutions. Everyone else, no matter how talented, simply could not afford to show up. That changed in 2022. Under President Joe Biden, Congress passed a bipartisan spending bill that allocated $4.5 million to finally pay White House interns. For the first time in the program's history, young Americans from working-class families, from community colleges, from households where every dollar counted, they could now realistically apply. The playing field did not become perfectly level overnight, but it shifted. The door opened a little wider. That door has now been quietly closed again. The Trump White House has reverted the program back to unpaid, and the timing of this decision is what makes it so worth examining carefully, because this is not happening in a vacuum. This is happening at the precise moment when the same administration has overseen one of the most aggressive reductions of the federal workforce in modern American history. Tens of thousands of government employees have been shown the door. Entire agencies have been gutted. Young people entering the workforce right now are looking at a federal job market that has been deliberately and dramatically shrunk. And now, the one prestigious entry point that remained, the White House internship, has had its pay stripped away, making it accessible once again only to those who can afford to work for free. Think about what that means in practice. A student from a middle-income family in Ohio, or a first-generation college student in Texas, or a young veteran trying to transition into public service, these people now face a choice that is not really a choice at all. Spend 10 weeks in Washington, cover rent, food, and transportation in one of the country's priciest cities, with zero income coming in, while also managing student loan obligations and family responsibilities. Or simply do not apply. The decision effectively filters the applicant pool before a single essay is read or a single interview is conducted, not by stating any preference openly, but by making participation economically impossible for an enormous segment of the population. That is not a neutral administrative policy. That is a structural barrier dressed up as tradition. Now, here is where the analysis goes deeper. Look at the internship application itself. The questions that prospective interns are asked to answer tell you almost everything you need to know about what kind of young person this White House is actually looking for. Applicants are asked to describe how President Trump's vision for America influenced their decision to apply. They are asked which current cabinet secretary they most admire. These are not questions designed to surface independent thinkers, policy innovators, or future public servants who might challenge conventional wisdom. These are questions designed to identify devotion, loyalty, ideological alignment. So what you end up with is a program that selects for both economic privilege and political conformity at the same time. The unpaid structure filters out working-class applicants who cannot afford to participate. The application questions filter out anyone who does not already see the world through a specific ideological lens. The result is an intern class that will be, almost by design, drawn from a narrow slice of America, affluent, politically aligned, and unlikely to ask uncomfortable questions. That is a problem that extends far beyond one internship program, because the people who intern at the White House are the people who go on to staff campaigns, fill government appointments, advise senators, and eventually run for office themselves. The pipeline matters enormously. Who gets into that pipeline determines who leads the country 20 years from now. When you restrict access to that pipeline through financial barriers, you are not just making a policy about unpaid work. You are shaping the future composition of American political leadership. And now consider the broader economic backdrop against which this is all unfolding. The United States job market is under significant stress. Tariffs have disrupted supply chains. Federal layoffs have removed tens of thousands of government positions from the economy. Young Americans graduating right now are stepping into one of the most uncertain job environments in years. The very administration that created many of these conditions is simultaneously asking young people to work for free at the institution that is responsible for those conditions. There is an extraordinary irony embedded in that sentence, and it deserves to sit with you for a moment. There is also a legal dimension here that analysts are quietly noting. When Biden made White House internships paid, it was not just a gesture of generosity. It addressed a genuine legal and ethical concern. Unpaid internships in the private sector have faced increasing legal scrutiny in the United States for years. Courts have examined whether certain unpaid arrangements actually violate labor law. The federal government, as the employer of these interns, operates under different rules. It is exempt from many of the protections that would apply in the private sector. But the optics of a government that lectures the private sector about worker rights while itself refusing to pay workers for full-time labor is not lost on labor advocates and legal scholars. There is also a quiet generational statement being made here. The Trump administration has consistently positioned itself as a movement that speaks for the forgotten American, the working man and woman who was left behind by coastal elites and out-of-touch institutions. Yet the decision to unpay White House internships does the opposite of serving that constituency. It says, in effect, that the most direct pathway into the executive branch of the American government, the internship program at the seat of power itself, is reserved for those who already have enough. The working American's child need not apply. What happens next is worth watching closely on two fronts. The first is participation. Will the applicant pool shrink? Will the demographic composition of the program shift back toward the wealthier, more homogeneous profile it had before 2022? If civil society organizations or academic researchers begin tracking this data, the numbers will tell a story that press releases will not. The second front is political. Democrats and labor advocacy groups have already begun drawing attention to this reversal. As the 2026 midterm cycle heats up, the symbolism of this decision is exactly the kind of concrete, kitchen table issue that can resonate with voters who might otherwise tune out abstract policy debates. It is easy to explain in a single sentence. This administration stopped paying young people who work at the White House. In a political environment where economic anxiety is high and trust in institutions is low, that sentence lands hard. There is a deeper question underneath all of this that no official statement will ever directly answer. What does a government believe about its own people when it asks those people to serve it for free? When it could afford to pay, and in fact did pay, with bipartisan support just a few years ago, but chooses not to? Every budget decision is a values statement. Every policy choice reflects a set of beliefs about who matters and who does not. The decision to unpay White House interns is small enough to pass without major headlines. But it is precisely the small decisions, the ones that do not generate outrage, that most accurately reveal the character of an institution. The young people who will still manage to intern at the White House, the ones whose family circumstances allow them to absorb the financial burden, will gain experience, connections, and credibility that will shape their entire careers. The young people who cannot afford to show up will gain nothing from this program because they were never really invited in the first place. And that gap between those who can afford access to power and those who cannot is not just a White House problem. It is an American problem that this particular decision just made slightly worse. Here is the thought to leave you with. Every generation, America decides, sometimes loudly, sometimes in near silence, who gets to be part of its future. The loudest version of that decision shows up in elections, in legislation, in court rulings, but the quiet version shows up in decisions like this one, in who gets to walk those halls, in who gets to learn how power actually works from the inside, in who, 20 years from now, will be sitting in the rooms where the real decisions get made. When a government stops paying its own interns, it is not making a financial decision. It is making a statement about who the future belongs to. And right now, that statement deserves far more scrutiny than it is getting.